Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tony Needs Hobbies. My name is Tony and as you can see it's another beer brewing day. However, I'm not going to show you the entire brewing process, which I have different videos about. I will link to those in the top right corner. In this video I will focus on making a yeast starter out of one of these Wyeast Smack-Packs. The process that I will show you has never failed me yet, so I hope it will be useful for you too. Have fun watching. Let's have a look at the Smack-Pack. It is important to use fresh ones for the highest yeast vitality. This pack is around 5 weeks old on the day that I make the starter. Inside is a small pouch with nutrient that activates the yeast when ruptured. This is done by moving the pouch to one corner and giving it a firm smack. Don't worry about the pouch to tear open at the seams. I haven't heard about this happening to anyone yet. Over the course of a minimum of 3 hours, the pouch will swell and will be ready to use for the next step, which requires a decent bit of calculations if you want to pitch the perfect amount of yeast. I am going to demonstrate how I used the very convenient Brewer's Friend yeast pitch rate and starter calculator to do those calculations for me. I'll put a link to the calculator in the description. I will use metric units and gravity for scale. I'm aiming for a 1.082 specific gravity before fermentation and 20 liters of wort. I will slightly underpitch because that's what Wyeast suggests in the datasheet if you want to manipulate the fermentation towards ester production. I use one Smack-Pack as mentioned before, and the manufacturing date was the 6th of June 2022, so very fresh on the brew day. I am however recording this on a different date, so I chose a date with the same interval between yeast production and brewing. To end up with the required amount of yeast cells, I'm going to do 2 steps of a 1 liter starter. It could be done with a large 2 liter starter too, but I don't have a 5 liter flask to fit 2 liters of wort. For each step, the wort will be made from dry malt extract and water in a 2 liter Erlenmeyer flask to have enough headspace. This will give the required amount of yeast, so with this theory in mind, I will now show you how I actually make that. I use a 2 liter flask, a magnetic stirrer, star sand for sanitizing, and for the wort I use dry malt extract and yeast nutrient. This process requires you to work very clean and with sanitized materials. We are going to combine wort and relatively a small amount of yeast. If there is anything else living in the flask, the yeast has to compete with that. Better to make sure the only living thing in the flask will be the yeast to prevent a spoiled batch of beer. So work clean, I can't stress it enough. All the materials will be put in a bucket full of star sand solution and left there until required. In the meanwhile, I heat up 2 liters of water to which I will add 1 teaspoon of nutrient. Depending on the nutrient you use, it might require a different amount, so check your nutrient instructions. To the water I add 200 grams of dry malt extract to get a wort with a starting gravity of approximately 1.037. This has to be boiled for 10 minutes. Then it's time to transfer half of it into the Erlenmeyer flask, to which the stirring rod has already been added. The other half goes into a measuring cup and will be put in the freezer until it is needed for the second starter step. Some aluminium foil is sanitized with star sand, after which it will be used to cover the flask. That will be placed in a very clean sink with cold water to cool the wort to room temperature before adding the yeast. As you can see, the pouch has swollen nicely in about 5 hours, so the contents are ready to be pitched into the flask, only after the wort has completely cooled down. The scissors and pouch will be soaked in the sanitizer before cutting the pouch open. Then the contents, except the inner pouch, are emptied into the flask, which is then again covered by a sanitized piece of foil and put on the magnetic stirrer overnight. When the stirrer is turned off and shows fermentation has finished, which you can tell if there are no bubbles rising, it is time to put the flask in the fridge so the yeast can settle out to the bottom. One day later, it is time to continue with the second step of the starter by boiling the frozen batch of earlier prepared wort for 10 minutes and letting it cool completely to room temperature. Before adding the cooled wort to the flask, I first slowly decant the fermented beer off of it. Then I put the sanitized funnel in and pour the cold wort in the flask and cover it again with a sanitized piece of aluminium and place it back on the stirrer. I set up a time-lapse shot to show you how the wort goes through the different steps of the fermentation in roughly half a day. When turned off, it is placed in the fridge again and stored there until brew day. The beer I'm brewing today is a Weizen Doppelbock, for which I chose the Wyeast 3068 Weihenstephan Weizen yeast to do the fermenting. I go through all the steps: crushing the malts, step mashing, sparging using a neat aluminium foil trick, filtering, boiling with the hops, and cooling it to fermentation temperature. Then I transfer it into the fermenting bucket, after which I decant the flask so only the yeast is left in it. The yeast in the flask is swirled up and then added to the fermenting bucket. I leave the beer in the fermenter for about 3 weeks, and I don't typically rack wheat beers. In 3 weeks it will be bottled and bottle conditioned, so in roughly 5 weeks I will be able to enjoy this refreshing Weizen Doppelbock. I hope fermentation will start real soon, and while I'm waiting for that I'm going to enjoy this homemade cider before cleaning everything up, because hey, that's what home brewing is all about. Cheers! I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and if you did, then let me know by hitting the like button. And please also consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this in the future. That's it for now. I would like to thank you for watching. Bye bye.